Hello, everyone. Welcome again to the Afrobeats class. Today's lecture delves into the history of Fela Anikulapo Kuti, not just as a personality who embodies African music and who has made a name when we think about Afrobeats across regions of Africa. However, it engages with the idea of Afrobeat and what that means for Fela's political movement, the underpinnings of politics in the work of Fela Nicola Kuti. The assigned reading for today from um, this text, the chapter 2 of A Quick Thing on Afrobeat by Christian Adolfo, explores the history of Fela Nicola Kuti, his birth, his movement from Nigeria to London to study music, and his background as a Nigerian whose parents, especially his mom, was a political activist. The work of her mom was an important part of his political history and how that enables him and embodies him to not just think about music, about what he's passionate about, but about activism and standing up for his people. While we have noticed that the idea of Afrobeats with the S discussed in the work of Ajibade, which we have read at some point in this course, Afrobeat has been described, I mean, the one with the S, has been described as the kind of music that crossed boundaries, that crossed regions, and that moved in and out of not just Africa, but also in the diaspora and relates more to um, global Black representation. Afrobeat, even though it seems to be tied to Fela Anikulapo as a personnel of African music, it also helps us to see what Fela thinks about blackness, black ideologies, and how this informs his movement and the kind of music he committed himself to upon his return from London. The work of African Americans like Malcolm X, Liz Isidore, and more were really instrumental to the way that Fela Anikulapo thought about what it means to be rooted in Africa and to recognize and acknowledge its African roots, how this connects to the idea of blackness and his commitment to returning back to Nigeria after spending 10 months in the United States, specifically in Los Angeles, and returning back home after doing several tours across regions of the United States to continue his political activism. Upon his return to Nigeria, he started the um, 70 Africa, which is banned. He changed the name to 70 Africa, and after a while, he moved on to create what he called the African Shrine. Within this space, he did not just sing music, he did not just sing songs, he did not just use African instruments. Instead, he made sure that his work encapsulates all issues that are surrounding, what he called the taboo topics. And what are the taboo topics within the context of Africa, within the context of Western Africa, and even in Nigeria? It has to do with the question of corruption and how the government constitutes an important tool in expanding what corruption is and using that to oppress people. Because Fela Anikulapo Kuti was committed to forging the course of emancipation of the people of Africa, of Nigerians. He did not just start the African Shrine, he also continued with what he called the YAP series. Within this YAP series, it gives him a space, and that space constitutes a political site where discourses about government, the ills of the society, are not just brought to the limelight, but there is a mimicry of what the government does within this shrine. And within this shrine, um during this discourse, there is a lot of humor, there is a lot of use of humor as a way to speak truth to power. Unfortunately, the works of Anikula Pokuti continues to um affect the government, not because Fela Anikulapo Kuti goes directly to them, but because he uses the dialectics of music as a way to engage his voice and to use that as a means of challenging existing rhetorics, existing narratives about power. And so, after some time, Fela Anikulapo did not just begin his movement with the people alone. He looked back to the self and dropped the name ransom, which he believes was part of the colonial ways of taking or stealing away from his identity, and replaced that with Anikulapo, which means the one who has death in his pouch. This name is also a way to embolden himself and to tell himself that he is capable of speaking his truth and living his own reality. Because Fela Anikulapo Kuti's work continued to gain attention, especially post Festac Festival in the early 1980s in Nigeria. Fela Anikulapo Kuti also developed the Kalakuta Republic, which seems to have a seemingly representation of what governance should look like. He created a space which he called his republic, and where he created a set of rules for himself and his people, the rules of punishment, and what this mean for the community he created. He lived in this Kalakuta Republic with his mother and with his own family. He has 27 wives and several children. The government of Nigeria became uncomfortable with the power Fela Anikulapo Kuti has amassed for himself, because he did not just stay with music, he also challenged Western recording companies by creating a record company that helps with the documentation of his own music. And as a result of this, post Festac Festival, which was supposed to gain a lot of attention, but because Fela Anikulapo Kuti was one of the artists who was also giving out a lot of music through his shrine and in the Kalakuta Republic, he gained a lot of attention, he gained a lot of followership, and then the Nigerian government decided to raid the Kalakuta Republic. Overall, this raid led to the death of Fela Anikulapo Kuti's mom, and there was a suspension or an overthrow of his republic. Despite the death and all the challenges that he faced, he had to move away from Nigeria for a period of time and then return back to continue his work. In this study, we are going to then move beyond just describing the narrative and the history of the emergence of Fela, his political rhetorics, and how he continues to speak truth to power. Instead, we also want to go beyond that to explore the idea of blackness and what this means in relation to colonialism and the colonial effects on a nation like Nigeria and many African nations. We are going to discuss some of his earlier works, especially the ones that he first published after his encounter with Liz Isadore in United States, and other subsequent work in which he spoke to power and engages with not just his music but the black identity and what it means for the Africans to have emancipation, even in the post-colonial era when Nigeria ought to have gained independence. I have left some questions and discussion points on Canvas. Please make sure you go through them, read the assigned reading, and respond to them. Should you have any questions or you need me to clarify anything, please do not hesitate to reach out. Happy learning!